Hello everyone, hope we are doing well and welcome to the Crystal Palace perspective ahead of West Ham against Palace at London Stadium on Sunday now. Without blowing too much smoke up his arse. I've been fortunate this season to have some really good people on the opposition preview. I'd like to think you agree. I see you in the comments telling me, so that's why I believe it. However, I followed this guy on Twitter for years, so it's a delight to have Dan join me here from HLTCO. I say from, he is HLTCO. Dan, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I'm not. Well, I mean, HLTCO is obviously the acronym. I'd like to think that I was the person that scored that playoff final winning goal, but unfortunately, I wasn't. I was just an 8-year-old boy. But yeah, very pleased to be here.
Thank you very much. Right, let's start with Crystal Palace. How's your season going?
How long have you got? It's a bit of a strange one for us at this point in time because, we are in a state of, it seems like, perpetual limbo. Obviously, Roy Hodgson came back at the back end of last season to replace Patrick Vieira. I think from an outsider's perspective, there were plenty of people that were perplexed by the decision to sort of relieve Pat of his duties. That said, I think if you speak to pretty much every Palace fan who watches every kick of our games, they will say to you that the writing was on the wall to an extent. We weren't scoring goals, we weren't playing with freedom, and it just felt like, rearranging the deck chairs on a Titanic. Roy Hodgson obviously came back in back end of last season and we had a tremendous uptick in form. Unfortunately for us, this campaign, with Wilfried Zaha departing for Galatasaray, with the injury from the summer for Michael Olise, Eze being out for a prolonged period of time, and now coming into this game this weekend without Eze and Olise, it has been very stop-start. And whilst you'd look towards the bottom of the table and you see the likes of Burnley and Sheffield United, Everton's points deduction, Luton, etc. At the moment, you've got these two games coming up for us, West Ham on Sunday and then Bournemouth in midweek at home. And I think if we lose both of those, then potentially you're going to be in a situation where the board might be getting itchy feet, shall we say, and potentially looking to relieve Roy of his duties, although I think from their perspective, they would rather he be that safe pair of hands and see us through this season before replacing him in the summer.
Interesting. Are you worried about relegation then, given what you've just said there?
I wasn't worried particularly. I mean, I don't want to sort of talk down the likes of Luton and Burnley and Sheffield United, but I think everyone who supports a club in the Premier League in that middle pack looked at the bottom of the table and thought to themselves, we'll be fine, especially when you throw in the 10-point deduction for Everton as well. But prior to the international break, we had Everton at home. We lost that game 3-2, and we sort of conspired to shoot ourselves in the foot, really, in that game. We got back to level and then sort of sat off them and gave them the win. Obviously, away at Luton last time out, losing 2-1. We didn't really seem to want to play until we fell 1 goal behind and 2-1 behind. And we could have easily got back to level. I think there were 12 or 13 minutes of added time at the end. We hit the bar. There were opportunities. But the main grumble really from Palace fans' point of view is that you look at our squad and on paper, Joachim Anderson, Mark Gay, Sam Johnston in goal, Doucouré up until last week, Jefferson Lerma, Olise, Eze, we shouldn't be even remotely in danger. And yet, if we lose, hypothetically, these two games coming up, then, Luton have got Brentford, I think, this weekend, and they'll obviously be buoyed by the fact that they got 3 points against us last time out. You can't really rest on your laurels. And, that in itself is something that Roy Hodgson has always been this sort of steady hand at the wheel, shall we say. But I think it's now 1 win in 6. And obviously, if you go and lose these next two, it's 1 win in 8 against beatable opposition. The rest of December, we've got games against Man City, Liverpool, Arsenal, I think. So Chelsea, there are plenty of difficult games. You've got Brighton thrown in there just before Christmas, which obviously for us is a huge fixture anyway. It just feels like, we needed to pick points up from this little run of games, Everton, Luton, West Ham, Bournemouth. And if we come away with none, then obviously alarm bells will start to ring.
It sounds like listening to a West Ham fan in some regards, in the sense that, you're talking about the squad quality, but the results perhaps aren't there. What about how you play, though? Are you content with the way you play under Roy Hodgson? Because as an outsider looking in, the players you've just mentioned, you've got some real talent in that squad and some real flair players in attacking midfield. And admittedly, I don't watch every Crystal Palace game. I think I've seen enough of you this season, and I have to admit, I've always been a bit disappointed when I've tuned in the sense that I don't think you're playing as good as you possibly could be or should be with the players at his disposal.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think that largely is one of the main frustrations for the fan base. You know, we've got a huge amount of affection and admiration for Roy. Obviously, he's been here now in two separate spells. But the first period, when it ended, you know, we did have this sort of dirge that we were playing. And I think there is this sense amongst the fan base that, you know, Mark Gay's stock is rising exponentially. You know, he's likely going to go to the European Championships and be hopefully pivotal to Gareth Southgate and the England squad this summer. Michael Olise has got an incredible amount of talent. I mean, I don't know if you've seen his goal against Luton from last weekend. Just one of those definition of, well, I'll just do it myself then. You know, picks the ball up on the right-hand side, beats a man, cuts inside. He's got that Arjen Robben sort of cutting on his left foot and put it into the top corner. Iberi Eze is a joy to watch. And Chet Decore, you know, Liverpool were being linked with him in the summer. Obviously, he's injured now for a prolonged period of time. But I think the main frustration for all of us is that you look at that core, you throw in players like Sam Johnston in goal and Joachim Anderson with his ability to pick passes out, and you feel as though this is a golden moment for us in terms of depth, and yet it isn't really being harnessed in the way that we would hope. You know, back end of last season, whether or not it was needs must, or whether it was just the sort of joy that Roy had at being back in the game, we were playing with a real verve, and that has dissipated somewhat. And then you look at players like Matheus França or even a Hamada, two players that are relatively young and on the fringes of the squad. The fan base is sort of looking at them as potential attacking options to help Michael Olise and, you know, unburden him from being the quote unquote star man in Iberi Eze's absence. But I'm just not sure that Roy will plump for those players. He tends to be quite safety first. You know, you can pretty much guarantee that Jeffrey Schlupp will be in the starting 11 this weekend. And from a Palace fan's point of view, you know, players like that, they serve a purpose. I think there are probably quite a lot of parallels with the way that David Moyes goes about his team selections. You know, it does the job, but I think from our point of view, Roy Hodgson's tenure has always worked when you beat the teams you're supposed to beat and you do a relatively decent job of putting up a solid fight against the top sides. But if your form against those teams you should beat deserts you, then you end up on a bit of a hiding to nothing momentum-wise.
I think what you're saying is going to be resonating with a lot of West Ham fans here. A lot of West Ham fans will be thinking, this is exactly the thing we've got with David Moyes at West Ham presently. And let's skip forward to the summer then. What's your hopes for Crystal Palace? On the assumption Roy stays for the rest of the season and you finish roughly where you are, 13th in the league. You stay away from a relegation battle, but you don't get into the top half. Roy departs in May. What's your hopes for Crystal Palace summer onwards?
Well, I think, you know, it's obviously tricky to plan too far in advance, but if you look at the sort of opening 6 to 8 months of Patrick Vieira's reign, you know, we want a team at Crystal Palace, and it's something I say regularly on the Palace podcast that I do each day. People talk about the West Ham way of playing football, or the way that Manchester United play, or the way that Spurs play. But I don't think outsiders to Palace would suggest that we have a way of playing, but we absolutely do in terms of getting the fan base on side. It's like this full-blooded style of football. You leave everything out there. You play on a counter-attack. You have pace. You have power. You look to get in the opposition's faces without, you know, overstepping the mark. And that is, you know, really what I would like to see from any incoming manager. You know, whether or not that's doable, it remains to be seen. I think even Patrick Vieira, he was probably helped more than anyone realised by the presence of Conor Gallagher in the midfield, because he was such a dynamic force. And without him at the beginning of the following season, we didn't replace him like for like, because it was practically an impossible job, really, given the way that Conor operated in our team. But we certainly lost a lot of that dynamism. And that is something that we would all like to see back. Obviously, you know, best laid plans, etc., etc. I'm just not sure what direction the club will go in, because obviously Roy coming back suggests there wasn't a great deal of long-term thinking there. But at the same time, they wouldn't have been particularly enamoured at the idea of allowing Patrick Vieira to leave mid-season. So once he did have that sort of uptick in form, I think it became a very easy decision for the board to make, and then give themselves hopefully 12 months to draw up a proper shortlist. At the moment, it's just a case of whether or not we have to put that plan into action a bit earlier than the summer.
Is there anyone in particular, manager-wise, that you'd perhaps be hoping that you are targeting?
I mean, it's tricky because I think we exist as a football club in a sort of difficult place, in the sense of I mean, Kieran McKenna is a name that immediately jumps to everyone's minds at the moment because of what he's doing at Ipswich. But obviously, they're flying high. They're likely to be either in the battle for automatic promotion or getting automatic promotion. And even if, Ipswich don't win promotion this season, say they fall away and finish third or fourth and then lose out in the playoffs, I'm still not 100% sure that Crystal Palace have the sort of pulling power necessary to take Kieran McKenna away from Ipswich, because they are historically a big club. They've got, a huge amount of backing in the stands, and they will have a plan with him in charge. Why he would abandon that for Crystal Palace, it remains to be seen. You may well find that he does jump at the chance to manage in the Premier League, but he would be at the top of the list. One manager who's out of work at the moment who has been mentioned is Lopetegui, the former Wolves boss. And I think he would, mesh quite well. That said, you look at the sort of reasons why he ended up leaving Molineux, and I think it was disputes over the amount of money. So whether or not we would have a transfer budget to satisfy him, the thing for me, and indeed many Crystal Palace fans, that I view as our USP is the academy and the ability to really nurture all the talent that we have in South London. It's on our doorstep and it's there as a sort of untapped resource, really. And I would like a manager that really pushed that forward. I mean, Steve Cooper is on relatively thin ice at Nottingham Forest at the moment, and whilst he may not be looked upon as a sort of glamour appointment, I think his focus on youth with the England under 17s and the players that he's brought in at his relative jobs at Swansea and Forest, I think it would be quite a good match. But at the moment, as I say, we are in this prolonged state of limbo, and it feels like that's likely to continue if we pick up, say, 3 or 4 points from the next two.
Yeah, everything you say is like copy and paste for West Ham. I guess we're in similar situations, and both of us could be looking for a new manager in the summer as well. And how we get between now and then, the journey, while it might be slightly different, I don't think there's anything too much that different either, in the sense that you're always 3 or 4 bad results away from question marks over sacking the manager now. So I think
I would just interject quickly, by the way, because it did cross my mind the other day, given the sort of not mounting pressure on David Moyes, because obviously you look at what he's doing in Europe, it's not like you're in immediate danger of sacking him. But I think in many ways, I look at what the board at Palace prioritise, and I don't necessarily blame them for it, because Premier League survival is paramount to the ongoing gravy train of the Premier League. It wouldn't surprise me at all if we got to the summer, West Ham parted ways with David Moyes to go in a new direction, and we went and appointed David Moyes as Palace boss. To be honest, I mean, that is something that did cross my mind, because he is almost a carbon copy of Roy in the sense of a safe pair of hands and someone that maybe doesn't play the most, enlightening football you'll ever see, but will keep you afloat.
Well, I have to ask you the big question now, don't I? Hypothetically, of course, would you take David Moyes as Crystal Palace manager?
It's one of those heart and head things. As I say, I understand it. If you're prioritising purely staying in the league and being competitive as a mid-table side, not being in any immediate danger of the drop and just sort of floating around, then undeniably. But it's that question of whether or not you try and push for something a bit more. You'll often get told as a Palace fan or any of those teams in the middle, particularly when you consider the size of our fan base relatively to, say, a West Ham, that we shouldn't, we should be careful what we wish for, etc., etc. But I just want, personally, that youth element to be a key part of our first team. And at the moment, I struggle with the prospect of getting enough players into that youth, from that youth setup into the first team, because of the be-all and end-all that is Premier League survival, because the likes of Jeffrey Schlupp will always be prioritised over, say, David Ozo in midfield. You don't know who David Ozo is, probably, but he's part of our academy, and he's a big lad. He's proven himself under 21s. He seems to everyone to be the sort of player that could make the step up. But in Roy Hodgson, you have this safety-first coach, and it does work, and it has been proven to work, but you just want a little bit more. Do you know what I mean? Not winning games 4 or 5-0 or going on a European adventure, but just having the dream of it. I said the other day, I think in the entire period of time we've been in the Premier League, we finished 10th once, and I think the lowest we've finished is 15th or 16th. And in that period, Leicester have won promotion, won the league, played in the Champions League, won the FA Cup, got relegated, and are now about to get promoted again. And you think we finished between 5 places. Now, you could argue that stability, you don't know how lucky you are, but unfortunately, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So,
What a fantastic summary comparing yourselves to Leicester. I like that. It was the same when I spoke to Joe from Turfcast podcast last week, the Burnley fan, and he said that they're bottom of the table behind a side that they finished 21 points ahead of last season, a side that sold the two best players in the summer, one of them to Burnley and Sander Berg, and they're also behind a side that's just been docked 10 points. He said that's how bad Burnley have been this season, and it just resonates with you. And what you just said there in comparison to Leicester, fantastic. I really like that one. Right, from your team to my team, Dan, what do you make of West Ham?
I actually, to be honest with you, and maybe this is part and parcel of what we're sort of talking about here. I look at West Ham, and I've said this pretty regularly on my pods over the course of this season. When you're at your best, you remind me of David Moyes' sort of heyday as Everton boss, in the sense of having that hard edge and players that will grind out results, but also having a degree of flair with the likes of Bowen or Paqueta, players that can, turn a game in a moment. Kudus as well. And that in itself, it reminds me of the Tim Cahills and the Pinars. When Everton were that difficult team to beat, obviously you aren't scaling the heights that he did with them. But you look at the European adventures you've had, and, I don't mind saying it, I envy it incredibly. I actually personally think that a lot of the sort of frustration from Palace fans at the moment, alongside the issues that I've already raised, it comes in the sense of West Ham getting into the UEFA Conference and going and winning it. It comes in the sense of Brighton, our biggest rivals in the Premier League, making it through to the knockouts of the Europa League last night, because that, comparison is the thief of joy. And if Brighton and West Ham weren't doing that, if Aston Villa weren't as upwardly mobile as they are, then maybe we wouldn't, be looking at it with such an envious glance. That said, we're at the moment so far away from having the sort of squad depth necessary to actually maintain our Premier League form alongside a European push that it sort of seems fanciful anyway. But this is the sort of level that we want to get to, and that in itself is something that I'm incredibly envious of West Ham for. In general, I think you'll probably beat us quite comfortably on Sunday. I know we went and beat you in the last minute with Michael Olise not so long ago, and we've had some big moments against you in recent years. But I just look at the relative position of both sides, and particularly given the fact that it's away from home, I would back you to get over the line.
Interesting. We'll get on to that in just a second. Is there any players that tickle your fancy from West Ham? I know you mentioned 2 or 3 of them there, but is there anyone else that catches your eye?
What, in terms of potential transfer targets for us, or just players that
just players you like, just players that when you watch West Ham, you think he's a damn good player, actually?
Well, I mean, with Bowen specifically, obviously, when you signed him, we were in the market for him at the same time. I mean, I think that summer, it may well have been Eze and Bowen. Bowen were the 2 players that were sort of going for, the Premier League move, and you ended up with Bowen, we ended up with Eze. I just think he embodies what I like in an attacking midfielder, in the sense that he doesn't seem to, and maybe you'll correct me on this, but he doesn't seem to get too down on himself at any point. You see players sometimes, they go through peaks and troughs. They might go and score 5 goals in a month, and then you won't see him or hear him again for another 6 weeks. He just seems like a very consistent, high-level performer for you, and someone that really seems to have bought into the culture of the club. Obviously, the whole thing about, the song Danny Dyer, etc. But aside from, the winning goal in the final, I just think he seems to be the definition of the face of West Ham at the moment, or at least the person that has really taken it on and bought into everything you as a fan base want. And I love to see players like that. It was the same with Grealish at Villa. It was the same with Zaha with us, albeit, they're boyhood players for those clubs. But it feels as though Jarrod Bowen and West Ham just belong together. And, from my perspective, it's great to see.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there, actually. The Athletic ran an article during the international break, didn't they? Like, which player sells the most shirts at these clubs. Bowen was top for West Ham, which is no surprise, really. But then when you consider how many sort of superstar names we've got, Eze and Olise are massive in Mexico. We know what the Mexican following are like on this channel because of Chicharito. When we had him, we could do a video about Chicharito, get triple the views of any other video because the Mexicans would all come watch it. When we signed Alvarez, the Mexicans were here again in the comments, bigging up Eze and Olise. We've got Kudus, who's a massive superstar for Ghana. We've got Lucas Paqueta. We've got some really big names at the club, but Jarrod Bowen is, like you said, the pin-up. He's a poster boy of the club, 7-year deal. He signed with us as well, committed to his future. He spoke about how he wants to retire here. And when a lot of footballers say stuff like that, I don't really believe them. I take it with a pinch of salt, but actually, maybe I'm being a bit naive, but actually, I do believe Jarrod Bowen when he said he wants
I
to
do
go
as
on
well,
become a
yeah.
legend. Yeah,
I mean, I would say alongside that, I'm assuming that a number of the Mexicans or the Ghanaians that have come to this channel, you talk about like shirt sales, if they have been brought to West Ham by those players, but then they start to buy into West Ham as a club, then undeniably, he becomes their sort of, not their god, but the player that embodies the club the most.
yeah.
You look at Bilbao, obviously that Basconi selection policy, and you've got Iñaki Williams, somebody that is the sort of face of that club. And I think he probably is well up there in terms of shirt sales because he is the player you look towards when you think of Athletic Bilbao. And I think in many ways, Jarrod Bowen is sort of that for you. And I think in another sense, we are struggling as a club at the moment a little bit because we have lost that lightning rod that is Wilfried Zaha when it comes to the face of our football club.
Yeah, right. Sunday, then, you've already given us a massive indicator in the sense that you think we'll beat you, but how do you see the game going? Because I'll be honest with you, with our game away to TSC last night, it's not ideal preparation. Hopefully, Kudus, Bowen, Alvarez, none of them took part in the game. They didn't even fly to Serbia. Hopefully, they're all okay for the game on Sunday. But I don't think many West Ham fans will share your confidence that we are going to win.
Well, I think one of those situations I always say, like, as a Palace fan, my first emotion is always pessimism. You can't feel like you're going to go into a game away at West Ham and smash them because pride comes before a fall. And, we have been so close to winning FA Cups and other things over the years that you just sort of end up erring on the side of caution. I mean, there is still a part of me that thinks we could go there and turn you over. The sort of hallmark of Roy Hodgson's time as Palace boss is that we've never got into serious danger, and just when you think you're staring down the barrel of a gun, we went to Old Trafford and we won there. Feels like about 10 years ago now, but it was only a few weeks. And we could go and beat you. I just think it will be something of a war of attrition, and I would imagine that the lack of creative thrust that we have without Eze there and putting it all on Olise's shoulders, paired with the fact that Chet Decore is not going to be at the base of the midfield, it's just a huge blow. I speak to people about Palace all the time from an outsider's perspective, and they don't, I think, ever truly grasp how important Chet Decore is to that midfield unit. And Jefferson Lerma being there is obviously a huge help, but with Will Hughes likely to deputise, I just think he might get a bit overrun in the middle, and that may well be our downfall.
Time to get your crystal ball out then, please, Dan. Can I get a score prediction from you?
As I always say on these podcasts, even though I've spent the last 10 minutes being incredibly negative, I can't come on here and say we're going to lose. So I'll say 1-1.
Fantastic, Dan. Thank you very much for joining me. If you want to hear and see more from Dan, you can follow him over on Twitter. I'll put a link to his Twitter account in the description below, as well as the link to his Patreon, where you can go and subscribe and get all things football into your ears every single day. But Dan, thank you very much for joining me.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure.
If you guys at home have enjoyed this video, please do drop a like on it by clicking thumbs up. Subscribe to Hammer Chat. I'll catch you in a bit.